welcome you to today's webinar titled Creating Engaging Meetings in a Remote World. In just a moment, I'll hand things over to our featured presenter today, Dr. Jason Pugh. But first, I'd like to tell you a bit about him. Jason is the Director of Leadership and Development for New Horizons Central and holds a PhD in Instructional Management and Leadership from Robert Morris University. Dr. Pugh has more than 5 years of software and education leadership experience and over 14 years teaching and training experience. He's also a published author, and we're very honored to have him speaking to us today. Jason, you now have the floor.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And I want to welcome you all to creating more engaging meetings in a remote world. I think many of us are facing a little bit of this post-COVID hybrid. What does this look like in our workplace? And so I wanted to introduce sort of what it is that we do for New Horizons and sort of the role that we have. So what we do for New Horizons is we really try to make sure that we help you to navigate what this looks like. I think that everybody's sort of finding this tough. Well, when do we meet? Do we meet face-to-face? Do we meet remotely? What does that actually look like? And so what I'm going to lay out for everybody over the next 35 to 45 minutes is really getting into what the new beginning looks like post-COVID. We're also going to talk about how do we better prepare for what delivery is supposed to be when we're creating these meetings. We're going to talk about the power of the nonverbals, and that doesn't mean just looking spiffy in a tie and doing that, but it really means how do you better connect to your employees with your nonverbals. We're going to talk about how to set yourselves up to deliver a better commanding online presence. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't give you some best practices for engaging better in remote meetings. That's going to be the foundation on what we're diving into today. And so to begin, the first thing I always like to talk about is what this new beginning looks like. And so I want you to think of a question to start with in the way we start talking to begin with. So number one, anybody know when Google was released? And you don't have to answer that right out the gate, but just think about that. When was Google released? Now that you may have an answer, YouTube. Anybody have a guess on when YouTube was released? Now, let's think of when was online communication technology really booming? See, many people used Illuminate or Adobe Connect, or now everybody's moving into Zoom. And even still, there was always Skype and Skype for Business, and there was all these sort of modalities that were floating around there. But once COVID hit, the problem we ran into is that we were thrust into this. This wasn't anything accidental. And so what happened is that we've learned, and according to Eikenberry and Turmel, authors of The Long Distance Leader, there are 3 things that are true, were true, and will always kind of remain true with the way communication technology is. Number one, it is the most rapidly changing enterprises. That's why I was saying that Google was 1998, YouTube was 2005, and really getting into Link and Skype for Business and Illuminate and other things, that's really turning it only into the last 10 years. So the next question I have to ask is, what does the next 10 years look like? Now that we're post-COVID, and I'm saying post-COVID in a way that it's still occurring and there's other things that are happening, but what does the next 10 years look like? What does communication look like? Is it VR? Is it holograms? Who knows? So the beauty of this is we have to be willing to ride with the change in the way virtual meetings occur. This is the new normal, and it is the new beginning. No one has explicit practices. Nobody has this way to say, look, you need to deliver meetings this way. It's not about having the answer. It's about having your answer. It depends on industry. It depends on department. It depends on best practices. But the third rule that really stands out more than anything else is that it's finding not just what tools can help us do what we need to do, it's actually ways to manage more meaningful connections. And so what I mean by that is, it's not just, well, how can I leverage Zoom to deliver the message we need to? Or how can I leverage GoToWebinar to deliver more meaningful message? It's really more about how do we leverage GoToWebinar to make more meaningful connections to the people that are here with us. It's not just delivery of information. It's really much more about mastering meaningful connections. And so one of the things that we have seen in this is that many of us still rely on one technological platform to manage all communication. Many people will say, oh, well, we use Teams, and that's great. How do you use Teams? Well, we use Zoom. Excellent. Or we still use email. That's all well and good. But how are you leveraging that to make the most of your communication? And so what that actually means is that we're talking about understanding what is known as bandwidth. Here's what happens. I'm sure that I'm gonna feel people laughing behind the screen for a moment, but how many of you have ever misread a text, or you've misread a chat, or you've misread an email? You misinterpreted it. The reason why is because the wider the audience, the simpler the message needs to be. So when we think about text and chat, this is the most narrow margin we have to play with because it's quick, it's instantaneous, and it gets the message across like that. However, trying to explain things on a deeper, more significant level isn't going to do the job. That's why we have group chats, right? We lay out one message and we don't need the back and forth. It's just laying out, this is what it is, 1, 2, 3, boom, move on. It's really the same thing we should be doing with emails, but how many of you have ever seen a work email that has been written like a dissertation? It's 278 pages, it's 68 paragraphs, it's lying out whatever it is, and you're like, I am not reading this. No matter how carefully we say, please read this carefully, they're not going to do it. The reason why is because the bandwidth doesn't allow for it. So emails are also a narrow bandwidth, which means that we need to make sure our messages are clearer, more concise, and more direct with what we're looking for. Now, as we're amping up this bandwidth, what starts to happen is we start getting into the phone. And so that's why we have conference calls, right? We all hop on a conference call and it seems to do okay. It does a good job. It doesn't do a great job because it's still not capturing the depth of the message. You can still hit a wider audience, but we're not diving into the true principle of what we want to accomplish. And so there are other things missing like face-to-face. There are other things missing like being on video cameras so that you can see the emotions, you can see the draw coming out of it. And so what starts to happen is that we start moving up the bandwidth. The only problem is that the more you move up the bandwidth, the less, or the fewer people rather, that need to be involved with the dialogue. Which means if you're having a video conference with maybe 5 people, that's good. If you're having 65 people on here, and I notice we have quite a few people on these webinars right now, I would not ask for you all to be on webcam because the bandwidth also doesn't allow for it to be that way. What happens with video conference speaker only is you can see we still have a good number, but I am the only one on camera because I'm the only one speaking. You can still deliver that for more meaningful messages. When you're really trying to dive into deeper rooted issues, deeper conversations, deeper dialogues, this is where we need less hands on deck, but you got to have the right hands on deck. And we need to make sure that we are really honing in on webcams. I think that many people resist webcams because it's uncomfortable, number one. And I think number two, the reason why they are hesitant is because, oh, well, what happens if I'm not dressed up on camera? Many companies, believe it or not, are being a little bit more understanding about what dress really needs to be. Now, if it's with a client and it needs to be that way, then yes, we need to make sure our professional appearance is what it is. But if we're having better internal team dialogue, we need to understand that people are working from home. And sometimes a dog might walk across the screen. Oh no, what happens? Right? Sometimes that happens. So we need to understand that as we get into higher bandwidth, there needs to be less people, but it's much more intimate and deep in the dialogue. What we make a mistake of doing is we send a chat to somebody because that's our preferred mode of communication. We'll send a chat, we'll only communicate via chat, And then what happens is they go, wait, I'm confused. So now what do? We pick up the phone. Now when we pick up the phone, we're now having a conversation and they're like, okay, I kind of get it. I think we're on the same page, and we hang up. And then we realize, no, do you know what? We need to have a meeting about this. If we would have actually paid attention to the bandwidth in advance based on the deep or the depth of the message, we probably could have saved ourselves a lot more time in the process. So as we dive into this, really understand what our communication channels are. Now, wait a minute. This makes me think for a minute and kind of says, well, that means that when we're preparing, we shouldn't just be preparing our content. And I want you to think for a minute. When you're walking into a meeting, are you just preparing your content? Go ahead and hit that hand raiser if you're like, yeah, do you know what? Pretty much if I'm walking into a meeting, I'm making sure my content is rocking and ready to go. And Mike, if you can kind of let me know how many people are kind of saying, yeah, do you know what? Content is kind of the real deal.
You bet. I see a hand or two.
Good. So then in the questions panel, if you don't mind sharing, what else are we preparing for? When we're having more effective meetings, what else are we preparing for? And once again, Mike, if you can, let me know some of the answers coming in.
Yep. First response just came in and said content. And the second comment is questions being asked.
Ah, so content is one thing, right? We have to make sure that our content is on point. That kind of preparation needs to occur. But now we're anticipating questions, right? So anticipating what our audience might be thinking could be really beneficial. One thing that I have written in my book on better remote engagement, and it's conquering the 7 C's for better face-to-face and remote teaching. This is something I've dedicated really the last decade of my life getting into. And what I have found is that there are 3 types of preparation we need to spend more time with. Number 1 is content. We know content matters. It's not something that really is like, yeah, if you know what you're talking about, then yeah, that makes a bigger difference. Of course, but ready for this? What happened if I delivered the rest of this webinar like this for the next 40 minutes? Would you all be truly engaged and would you truly understand and pay attention to the dialogue? Of course not. Of course not. Colleges, on-the-job trainings, they teach us how to prepare for content. And that's where we dedicate all our focus. The problem is that content is the smallest part of meaningful preparation. To help educators, and listen, when you're at a meeting of any kind, you are an educator. You are the one sharing meaningful information to another person. So then when that happens, I've created what is called a CYA model. And yes, get your minds out of the gutter. It may do that. It may cover your buns for a moment, but what it also does is it stands for content, yourself, and your audience. And what that means is that you don't only prepare your content, you prepare for who you are in the way you're going to deliver that content. Who are you? Who are you in the way you deliver meaningful content? Are you exciting? Are you passionate? Are you enthusiastic? Are you straight? Are you direct? What's your approach? And the other thing is that approach going to connect with the people I'm speaking to? What do they need? What are their acquired approaches that they gravitate to? See, we always talk about, boy, this person was really engaging and this person was really exciting. What does that mean? What that means is that not only did they know their content and they were knowledgeable, but they knew exactly who they were and the way they were going to deliver that message, and they knew exactly the way that their audience was going to receive it. So we need to prepare for all 3 of those. Because after all, content is the smallest cog. It's important to know your content. It's important to be knowledgeable and competent and credible. Of course it is. However, if you are boring, they will not listen. And I don't mean to say, oh, well, we're just boring, and that's not what I mean here. What I mean by that is saying, if we are not truly looking for ways to engage other people in a virtual environment, they will do this. See you later. They will turn off their webcam and they will multitask and they will no longer engage with what you're saying. And I always get the question, well, can't we just require them to do that? Sure, they will comply, but they will not commit. And there's a big difference between gaining compliance and gaining commitment. So I empower, not require. So whenever I engage in delivery, what I want you to think about is, what strategies am I using in this moment to better connect with all of you? What have I done to prepare myself, not my content, but my actual self in the way I'm going to deliver this information? What did I do to prepare and anticipate what you needed to make sure we were connecting? That is what CYA is all about. So I'll give you exactly what I did. I prepared content. Absolutely. I prepared material to better prepare for more meaningful remote meetings. I've now given you a preparation strategy, and I've talked to you about ways to use different communication modes for different communication channels, right? Of course. But how was it delivered? It was delivered passionately. It was delivered authentically. It was delivered with real world application. It was right. It's delivered in that facet. And the reason why I'm taking that approach too is because I'm anticipating that you all are facing post-COVID hybrid situations to where you're trying to navigate what a meaningful meeting actually looks like. If I have that right, hit the hand raisers for me. And Mike, now let me know in about 20 seconds how many people hit that hand raiser. How's the numbers looking now, Mike?
Actually, none yet.
None yet?
Wait, now they're coming. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about a dozen right now.
About a dozen, and I bet you in the next 20 seconds it starts to build up even more. When we talk about preparing yourself, it's really about focusing in on what it is your audience is truly looking for. What are the people that you're meeting with truly looking for out of you, and who are you in the way that they can trust you? So when we're diving into this, what starts to happen is that understanding the goal is this. You walk in with a tool, but if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, you will treat everything as if it's a nail. And that means that if I walk in with one strategy and one strategy only in the way that I am going to deliver information, then I did not do my job. That's why when many people walk in and you see them start a meeting with, okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, first, let's dive into this. What happens is you're already going to lose probably about 25% of your audience, and they will not engage because that's not what they're looking for. We need to better anticipate what that looks for, and we need to be ready to adapt. We need to be ready to adapt. When working in the remote environment, I always say to be like the amoeba. And when we talk about the amoeba, what I'm really diving into is you all know what you offer. When you know yourself, you know exactly what you offer. And an amoeba, folks, never changes its core. They are shapeshifters. They can adjust their size, adjust their volume, adjust their pseudopods, but what they're really doing is their core never changes. So do you know the 4 things that makes you, you, in the way you deliver? And I will tell you the 4 things that I am in the way that I deliver that does not change no matter what, whether you've known me 30 minutes or 30 years. What happens is you are going to get peak out of me in my delivery, in my style. You get passion, you get engagement, you get authenticity, and you get kindness. Those are 4 things that I do whenever I deliver information to another person in my meetings. When I'm working with my team, I am passionate, I will passionately listen, and I will passionately speak. I am engaging, which means I make it a mutual dialogue, a give and take. I am authentic, which means you don't have the, okay, folks, let's take a look at the next slide. And okay, moving forward, here we are. That's not the approach. It's authentic. And the other thing is extending a little bit of grace, a little bit of kindness. What happens from there, though, is I still recognize that that may not connect with everybody. So then what I do is I pay attention and I read the situations. What am I noticing still in this dialogue? Are people glued to the screen? Are people speaking up? Are people participating? Are they sitting back? What is actually happening? And so from there, what I do is I extend the pseudopods. So now what I mean by that is I am typically a speaker. I'm somebody that I don't mind speaking. I'm very casual with my speaking approach. But one strategy I did to extend the pseudopods was I involved you into the questions panel. I involved you into the hand raising. And I do that with my teams. I create room for invitation. That's one thing that I've done to extend my pseudopod, because then people want to feel like they're interacting with the dialogue. That's why I'm saying when we go back to this CYA model, how well do you know yourself in the way you're going to deliver? And how well are you anticipating what your audience actually wants? As the great Socrates so once eloquently stated, R.I.P. Socrates. Wait, too soon? 2,000 years? My fault, folks. Know thyself. You have to know yourself in the way you deliver information. And then you also have to pay attention. Is the way I'm presenting to this going to actually resonate with them? So a couple of strategies I bring to the table. Number one is known as the Mehrabian rule. And this is known as the 738-55 rule. And what that means is that out of everything that I engage other people with, I know that only 7% are the actual words I'm saying. I know what creates meaningful engagement and creating more engaging meetings are the actual tone and the body language in which I'm emoting it. That's why I said earlier, if I taught you like this, how many of you would truly digest the information and focus? None of you. Because the words are the words and the content is the content, but that doesn't make much of a difference if the attitude behind it doesn't come through. So the next time your employees say, well, why do we have to be on cameras? I would say the last thing I would want to do is miss 55% of the way you're emoting the message through your body language. The last thing I would do is want to miss the 93% of how you are delivering the message and how you are emoting the message. That's the last thing I would want to do. That's how we empower people to be on camera a little bit more. Now, this isn't always applicable to written and phone conversation. And what that means is that when you're having those kind of dialogues, you're going to need to amp up your clarity and you're going to need to amp up your tone even more. So here are some final strategies I can give you. Whenever we're talking about creating more meaningful meetings, the 5 things you can do in your vocal delivery, which is the 38%, is number 1, make sure your tone's on point. And what I mean by tone is this. I don't mean your attitude per se. I mean in tone, I mean variation of your pitch. Notice I'm bringing high range and then I'm bringing low range, but I'm adjusting my range in the way I'm delivering message. Nobody wants a monotone speaker. They will tune out. So you will lose engagement in your meetings if you're talking like this the entire time. Okay, everybody, thank you for your time. Nobody's going to engage. The other thing is to watch pace and rhythm. I will tell you, my wife loves murder shows, and I'm not saying she's plotting against me or anything like that, but I'm very careful the way I sleep at night. The idea behind pace is one person she truly loves in the murder shows is Paula Zahn. And I don't know if you know who Paula Zahn is, but she has this real comfortable cadence, right? First, she will start in one manner and pause, and then the next time she'll speak in a different manner and pause, and then she'll finish out very, very direct. But her cadence is flawless. It's a way that you can gravitate other people. is watch the speed in which you deliver a message. With speed and pace comes emphasis. There is power in the pause. There is power in the pause. Give room for people to interact with you in the meeting. Don't ask a question, wait 5 seconds, and then say, oh, I guess nobody has anything. They might be digesting. And that's why whenever I asked Mike to give it 20 seconds, I knew you were all still digesting the message. And then I said, well, do you know what? It's probably going to start to come in. And notice what happened. Pop, 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 pop. Engagement, 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 engagement. Don't be afraid of the pause. Silence is power. Use your emphasis and your pausing effectively. The other thing is volume. I am a loud guy. I will be very candid with you. I am 6'6", I am a tall guy, and I am from Pittsburgh. We are talkers. I know I have loud volume. However, I know that whenever I'm creating a more meaningful message, I soften my register. That will draw people in. So adjust your volume. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more charismatic. Sometimes we need to bring it back. And lastly is create clarity. When you are speaking, speak with the purpose that you're exuding clarity in message. Stop using these fancy phrases and these sort of canned phrases that are just starting to work with other people. Allow your clarity and your authenticity to come through. If you have a message you want to share, share the message. It goes a long way because they see authenticity through your clarity. That's 38%. With the 55%, I have 5 more. Number 1 is eye contact. Now, I know the first thing you're thinking with eye contact is wait, if you're talking to a camera, how do you create that? Do you notice that mostly, even in today's presentation, I haven't been staring directly at the camera as I'm delivering this? I'm going to, but I'm also going to look left and right as I'm engaging. The reason why is because you're not delivering the 5 o'clock news. Tonight at 5, find out what's going on in your neck of the woods. You're not delivering the news, you're having a meeting. If you're having a meeting, create a comfortable space to have dialogue. So whenever I say eye contact, one strategy I do is I actually position the participants slightly on my other screen so that I can be able to engage with them as I'm talking. So I'm on multiple monitors right now, and the reason why is because you all are right here. So I'm paying attention to whenever you're doing those things, because that creates more meaningful connection. The other thing is facial expressions. We have to watch our faces in meetings, folks. There is such a thing as RBF, and it is known as resting basic face. Sometimes we have to watch our basic reactions as we're going through, and if our basic reactions is, they're going to catch it. If their basic reaction is, they're going to catch it. So we have to be mindful of our facial expressions on camera. The other thing is posture. When we are on camera, sitting back creates less presence. So we want to make sure we're leaned in. Leaning in shows investment into dialogue. The other thing is gesticulation. When you're gesturing, when people see more of your hands, they trust you more. So when you're speaking and you're engaging with one hand or even 2 hands, what happens is people have a tendency to trust you more. And lastly, when we talk about proxemics and physical contact, once again, in a remote meeting, physical contact isn't anything. But when you talk about proxemics, what that means is how close are you to the camera, right? How close, how far away are you to the camera? So these are going to be some tips that I'm going to give you. Are you sitting all the way back? Or are we too close? See, we have to watch what we're doing here. So we have to watch our approach on what we're trying to deliver overall. So find comfortable proximity to your camera. These are ways you can enhance your body language. And so to give a few final tips for what we're trying to accomplish today, number 1 is deliver a better presence. And what I mean by that is watch your backgrounds and the way you're delivering your message. Everything you see behind me is purely intentional. This is not a virtual background. That's a wall. And the way I've set up and positioned myself is, number one, my shoulders are always between the logo, the New Horizons logo. And yes, obviously it's there for branding because go New Horizons. At the same time, though, you can see that it allows me to be centered on camera. It allows me to build better presence. And my head, the degrees, as incredible and as they are, they're there to keep me vertically centered. My head is not cutting off the camera whenever I'm speaking because I've set up a visual line at the top to hold me center on camera. The other thing is my lighting is behind me. I have a lamp here and I have lighting here. The reason why is because now I pop on camera more. I am approximately 2 feet from my camera. The reason why I do that is because, once again, when you're further away and you lose space on camera, you are no longer commanding presence on camera. You are now, when you're up, you're now commanding more presence on camera. These are all strategies you can bring to the table to build better command on camera. In addition, when we're talking about etiquette and delivery, I'm going to give a few things. Number one, make sure you know how to leverage the platform. I can't tell you how many times you hop into a meeting with somebody and they're like, wait, I don't know where my camera is. Hold on, wait, I need to, and you're like, that's things we need to pay attention to. Make sure no random websites are up when you're presenting. The last thing you need is to have your employees see something about an email from your owner about something that's happening. That doesn't need to occur. Be on camera before you're on camera. And I know that sounds a little weird, but make sure before you hop on camera, you see what you're looking like before you're on camera and make those adjustments before you hop in. The reason why you see me looking to your left and to your right is because you all are in the room with me. You just don't know it. And lastly, you notice I've asked you questions, brought in a little bit of light humor from time to time, and don't be afraid to smile. Now, I'm not saying fake your smile or anything like that, but find something that will genuinely create engagement. So some final tips and tricks that I'm going to give you to move forward, not just on your virtual camera presence, but things you can do to better engage your team members online. Rule number one, be the first one in the room. This is from the 8 Core Practices of Facilitative Leaders by Michael Wilkinson. Number one, be the first one in the room. Stop being the last one in the room. Anybody want to know why? The moment that other people in the room, they've now established dominance in the conversation. You don't even realize it, but they did. I individually greet every person by name before hopping into the meeting. So I will get in about 5 to 7 minutes early. Now, I know that my team, when they're hopping in, are typically hopping in right about 2 minutes before the call. I get in about 5 minutes before the call, and then when people start hopping in, I'll say, hey, good morning, Jim. Hey, Hamish. Hey, Dave, how you doing? And I just lay that out. And the beauty of doing that is 3 things. Number one, when you call on them, they're much more willing to engage with you directly. Number two, what happens is they know that whenever you're speaking to them, it's Lauryn Hill. Ready or not, here I come. You can't hide. I'm gonna find you, right? How many of you sang that in your head? I know some of you did, right? But what happens is that whenever you speak to them, they now know they can't hide from you in the meeting. They will be much more willing to dive into the dialogue. They will be more willing to hop on the camera because they know that they know that you know that they're there. And lastly, the third thing is when you individually greet them by name, there's no sweeter sound than the sound of one's own name. They know that they matter in the dialogue, which means they're going to be more willing to speak up. Number two, I use what's called a 4E strategy. And what I do is in every meeting, I'm going to explain the purpose as to why we're meeting. Now, if it's typically like a daily touch base or things like that, they know what that is, so you don't have to explain the purpose. But if they don't exactly understand why they're having the meeting, and I don't mean to discuss. Discuss is so vague. We're brainstorming. We're making a decision. We're creating a better process. Why are we here? Number two, get them excited about being there. It's bad enough. How many of you like going to meetings? Most people don't. So get something to get them excited. And we used to do that when we were face-to-face by bringing in donuts and chocolate and things like that, right? Because let's face it, folks, donuts make us go nuts. What happens though is in remote, we don't do that anymore. So what if you did virtual rock, paper, scissors to kick off every meeting? Winner gets a gift card. Could be a strategy, right? I love virtual rock, paper, scissors. What if we did, hey, do you know what? Doggo Friday. On the Friday, let's show the dogs, right? Let's show those dogs. What if you did something like that to get them to actually want to be there? Not only that, but they might be on camera more. Number 3, we empower the process. And by empowering the process, that means not that you're saying what I'd like to do is this. What you get into is what we are going to do is this. We include we language and invite them. Engage participation actively. Ask more questions, and not these targeted questions, but ask them questions that they want to answer. The next meeting you have, lay out better ground rules. And I don't mean laying out ground rules on what they need to do, but make sure they know how to do it. Do they know how to turn on their webcams? Do they know how to type in the chat? Do they know how to hop on? Do they know how to unmute? Do they know how to screen share? Make sure we lay that out for them. Make sure that we are engaging round robins. Give them the opportunity to come to the meeting and lay out a better foundation. Some people like to make sure that they are saying, look, before the next meeting, make sure we're coming in with 2 strategies to implement. Make sure we're coming in with your best decision, your shortlisted decision on what you're looking for. But lay out better inside before the meeting happens. Give them the opportunity to come to the meeting with information. If you're having longer meetings, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but if you are having longer meetings, give them opportunities to break out. Because people might not be comfortable sharing it to everybody, but they might be more comfortable sharing it in groups of 2 or 3, not in front of the boss. So give them an opportunity to break out. This is one of my favorite things, is virtual agreement. One of the worst things we can do is have a meaningful meeting and say, okay, so we're all on the same page, right? Nobody says a word. Nobody says a word. And then by silence, we go, okay, by your silence, I mean, yes, that's wonderful, folks, thanks. And then what happens? Hey, can I talk to you after the meeting? Hey, I need to talk to you after the meeting. Hey, I need to talk to you after the meeting. And now you just had 3 more meetings after the meeting, all because we didn't actually get clarity. Get clarity. Make sure that before they leave the meeting, make sure they have that. One thing I love is gladiator style voting, right? If everybody's on camera, 1, 2, 3, are we all on the same page? Pop. Now you have virtual agreement there. Ready for this? If you've enjoyed your time with me today, do me a favor and hit that hand raiser one more time for me. Now I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds. If you've enjoyed your time today on this 1-hour session, do me a favor, hit the hand raiser button that Mike showed you earlier in today's presentation. Give it another 10 seconds, Mike. How are we looking, Mike?
They're just all of a sudden starting to come in fast and furiously. 7, 8, 9, 10, a dozen, 15, 18, 20. Yeah, they're all pouring in.
There it is. See what happens? Because it might take 10 seconds to find where those darn hand raisers are again. But what we have established now is virtual agreement. Give an opportunity to establish virtual agreement. The other thing is screen share when appropriate. Now I'm delivering a presentation. So in delivering a presentation, I am going to screen share a lot more. But if we're having a dialogue, unless you have information they need to see, keep the screen share off. Because what happens is when you're having a meaningful dialogue and you have something on the screen, it's no longer a dialogue because their eyes are fixated on what's on the screen. So allow opportunity for the dialogue in discussion. You don't have to screen share while having dialogue. And lastly, lay out exactly what we covered. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So to wrap up, now that we've identified some critical skills and successfully managing some teams and some strategies and meetings, now that we've leveraged better communication and now we've understood sort of core effective team dynamics in better teams and meetings, what I'd like for you to do is take a look at a couple of the classes we offer too, which is managing remote and virtual teams. That would be one that we teach. It's a really good 2-day workshop we have to where we really dive into your teams. We could talk about critical facilitation skills. If you're doing more of what I'm doing in the facilitation realm, that's going to make a difference. Communicating across your organization, which means if you have a lot more interdepartmental team meetings, that would be an amazing class for you to have. And if you're really still trying to navigate this change thing that we're going on, leading change in a complex world is the way to go. So take your learning to the next level. If you're interested on what I was teaching overall as far as remote engagement and really diving into that, I would recommend checking out Conquering the 7 C's for better face-to-face and online teaching. It really does get into the engagement factor. How do we engage people much better? So take your learning to the next level, folks. The biggest thing is that we do have these webinars that will be available for you. Don't forget that you can see class schedules on the website with what you have in the presentation. And just one thing I want to remind you of before we start diving into questions. We've been doing these online trainings for 20 years now. This is not our first rodeo. So I know many of us were thrust into this, but we've been doing this a long time and we're here to help. And our Center for Leadership and Development has 26 different titles to streamline what you're looking for. We customize durations. We really focus to fit your team's needs. And if you really want to understand more, reach out to your local center. So with that said, I'm going to open up the floor to some questions, and we're going to lay that out first and foremost.
Great, thank you so much, Jason. As he mentioned, if anybody has any questions, please do take a moment to type them into the questions box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can shortly. And if anyone's interested in the material presented in this webinar, or if you have questions regarding available course offerings, please do contact your local center for further information. You can log on to newhorizons.com and do a zip code search for the center nearest you. And our webinar schedule is also up to date on our website, www.newhorizons.com. Just scroll partway down the first page, click on the webinars link, and you can view the full schedule and register for any upcoming sessions you'd like. And a friendly reminder, we will be sending out the recording link to today's webinar later today. Before we get to the questions, I did want to mention, when you asked the question early on, Jason, about what people can do to prepare for a meeting, we had a lot of great responses that came in late, so I want to share them with you in case you have any comments on them. We had some things you should think about: how to deliver the content and receive feedback, possible pushback, who your audience is, and future interactions and client team building based on the information provided.
Excellent. What I like that I'm hearing here is that there's much more of a focus on the audience and their needs and anticipating those, and not just focusing strictly on the content. The third piece I really want you all to focus on and really take some self-reflection in is, who are you in the way you deliver? What's your style? What's your approach? Are you engaging? If so, how? How do you engage other people? Who are you in the way you deliver? That's the third piece.
Awesome. And first question, what do you suggest for people who are not wanting to speak up in a meeting?
Oh, good question. If people are not wanting to speak up in a meeting, one thing that I like to do is I will maybe talk to them before the meeting. Sometimes the meeting, I'm not saying having the meeting before the meeting, but really get their dialogue and maybe say, do you know what, look, I really value what you have to say. And I know sometimes you don't feel comfortable sharing in front of everybody, but you do have a lot of good ideas. And, you know, what do you think something might be done here? Now, once that happens, I will revisit that in the meeting, but I'll do it in a very positive way. And I'll say, Mike, you brought up something really earlier. You had a great question about suggesting, you know, what do people do when people aren't speaking up? And so what happens is now you now feel more compelled to dive in. The other strategy, and don't use it as a manipulation technique, but use it as a way to entice them to want to engage. Mention everything, but leave out one detail so that they fill in the gaps. If you get them to fill in the gaps, they'll be much more empowered to speak up the next time.
Awesome. And you mentioned being the first into the meeting. Do you recommend leaving participants in the lobby until closer to the start time or not?
Oh, good question. So here's what I would do. It depends on how much in advance you're getting into the meeting. So if you're getting into the meeting 30 minutes before and you don't want all these people just sitting around, yeah, they can sit in the lobby. However, if you're getting in 5 minutes before the meeting and people start making their way in, maybe they're in the lobby for a minute and then you start introducing. I really like having people just naturally come in once I'm in. And the reason why I like doing that is because then I can individually greet them by name. If I keep them in the lobby, now I have 4 people all coming in at once. And now I'm like, hey, Jim, hey, Dave, hey, Mark, hey, Sue, right? And now all of a sudden that happens. Whereas if they start coming in one at a time, you can say, hey, Jim, how you doing? Hey, Kara, what's going on? And now we start having that dialogue starting to move in. So I would actually recommend once you're in, if you're getting in 5 to 7 minutes before, then once they start coming in, really start greeting them.
Great.
No lobbies needed.
What type of donuts do you recommend using to reward participation in a virtual meeting?
So if you don't have donuts, what I would recommend is this. So when you're having virtual gift cards or things like that, you could set up better virtual gift cards for your teams. So not saying reward, like encouraging, say for instance, participation, but let's say for instance, if you wanted to do something fun and you did that rock, paper, scissors, right, on camera, and you did that, winner could get a Dunkin' Donuts gift card if you wanted to do that, or winner could get and I'm not trying to endorse anybody over somebody else, so I'll say Tim Hortons, or I'll say other sort of donut connections, or whatever it is. I don't want to endorse one, but you could do a virtual gift card for the winner to do it that way. So you can create more fun and games in doing so.
Great. And in thinking about preparing for the audience, if you're unfamiliar with the audience, should you just play on the strengths of yourself in order to make the presentation more impactful?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion. I typically do, because then in the moment, as you're engaging other people, you start to read the situation. Every new workshop I teach is typically 90% new people that we're getting into, unless we're doing a private event where we start to get to know the same people. But I will say that yes, if that's the case, know yourself. Know what you're walking into when you're meeting new people. Rely on that's why that why in CYA is so important.
Awesome. And then how do you coach someone in a positive way to use their camera better without discouraging them in using their camera? I have a team member that seems unaware and moves his laptop screen sometimes and zooms in on areas and does other distracting things.
So what I would say is look, I always play the game the last thing. I play the last thing. The last thing I want to do is misinterpret something you're doing. The last thing I want to do is, see that maybe you had something on and then something shifted in a different direction. So the last thing I want to do is divert more attention to you that might be unnecessary, right? So the idea is that the more that we are centered on camera, the better presence you have. And that creates better meaning on what we're trying to do. So I always play the game the last thing. I use what's called contrasting statements. I tell them the last thing they would want, and then I tell them the best thing that we could get out of it.
All right. And is there a healthy balance between mandating or empowering, this person likes that language, people to use video and then allowing meetings without video? Zoom fatigue seems to be real. It seems to be a real thing that's not going away anytime soon.
It is. No, cam fatigue's real. So yes, there is a balance. And so what I will do in setting empowerment is saying, look, if you feel this is a meeting, so I will specify that when these meetings happen, because this is a deeper meeting with discussion, this would be a meeting where we would want to have cams on. Or this may be a meeting to where, look, we're just running through some quick touch bases. So if you don't want to have them on, no sweat here, right? So you can specify first and foremost. And the other thing I would say is that whenever I create empowerment for those cameras, I always like to say, look, I don't want to misinterpret anything you're saying. So this is why we want to have this. This is why we want to have cameras. Now, does that mean we have to have cameras on the whole time? Say, for instance, Mike, some people might have an hour meeting, and being on camera for an hour straight might be a little bit daunting. So yes, if they do need to turn their camera off for a moment or two, or take a 5-minute breather, or do something of that sort, go ahead and do so. I'm not going to be offended by that, but I'd rather have you on the majority of the time and be committed to it than have you on for 60 minutes and just comply.
Great, thank you. And then I think I'm communicating pretty clearly. How do I make sure that I'm right?
What a good thing that is. Okay, so I always believe in embracing the gray. No solutions that have ever been presented are right or wrong. I've never found a solution I've brought to the table where I was 100% right. as much as I'd like to be. So the way that I view this is perspective. They have a perspective and you have a perspective. If you are sharing something that you think you are right on, really take a moment to take off your own shoes before walking in theirs and really see, how are they going to digest this message? Not am I saying it the way I want to say it, but am I saying this how they can actually digest it? Because that's really going to be what matters. You can say that you think you're right all day long. It isn't going to resonate with the audience. We have to understand, what does right look like to them? That's what I would suggest.
Awesome. I like that. And is there a difference in how I can best communicate when I'm working with a boss versus a peer versus a subordinate?
Yeah, we teach a full 2-day course on that called Extending Your Sphere of Influence. No, the idea behind that is, yes, there is certain ways, and I could really dive into that on a deeper level, but yes, there are ways that you can do that, to where if you're communicating with your boss, I'll give a quick tip. Whenever I'm talking to a boss, I will say, help me to understand. When I'm speaking to my team, I will use talk to me about this or walk me through this, right? Whenever I'm telling my boss to walk me through something, they might think I'm incompetent, but if I say help me to understand, they know that I'm bridging a gap. When I'm talking to my team, I will say walk me through it, so that they can be able to process what they're trying to get across.
Awesome. And we have one last question.
Full 2 days on that.
And great. And we have one last question before I ask. I just want to remind people, in case anybody has any additional questions, that they still have an opportunity to submit them. The last one I have is, how can I encourage others in my organization to communicate better?
We do trainings. No. How do you, so repeat that question for me one more time, Mike.
How can I encourage others in my organization to communicate better? It sounds like maybe they're having some challenges with the communication they're receiving.
Yeah, I honestly think that sometimes in those cases, that's why we do private events, because when we do these private events, what starts to happen is we start to learn where the disconnect occurs. I think what happens is find the root cause of what is causing the miscommunication. Is it clarity in message? Is it personality conflicts or clashes? There could be a lot of roots as to what's causing it. So it's not a simple diagnosis, and that's kind of why we do these fuller private events, to where we really get to know the team dynamic.
That makes sense. Great. Well, that's all the questions that I see here, Jason. I really do appreciate your time. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything we should have asked and didn't? Anything else that's come up in your thoughts while we were speaking?
So I think it's one of those things that I want to go back to one of those questions real quick, Mike, that somebody said, if you don't know your audience, should you rely more on yourself? And the answer is 100%. That's why absolutely knowing who you are and the way you deliver a message is truly valuable. So if I was to give everybody a little bit of homework from this webinar, I'd want for you to do one thing and one thing only. What are 4 qualities to describe exactly who you are in the way you deliver? I mentioned mine is peak: passion, engagement, authenticity, and kindness. What are yours? That is my one sort of leave off for all of you before we wrap up today's webinar.
Thank you, Jason. That was really valuable. We appreciate your time. And this concludes today's session. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you again, Jason. It was really wonderful.
Absolutely. Pleasure was all mine. Thank you, everybody.